Hello and welcome to The People's View. My name is David Schoeneman. I'm your host on this episode. I'm sitting in once again for Carl Seidel, who normally hosts this show. On People's View, we take a look at issues that are happening in and around Nashua and the state, sometimes on national level, and we look at them from a viewpoint that we call the People's View, which is, I think, much like you would have if you were sitting around the kitchen table talking about issues that are going on. So today we've got some state issues we're going to talk about. And with me in the studio to help me discuss some of these issues is Don LeBrun. Don, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And you were state rep for a couple terms.
Yep.
And you were an alderman here in Nashua.
An alderman also, yes.
So you've got a lot of perspective on what's going on in the city and what's going on in the state.
I think so.
There are a number of things that are happening in the state, even though here we are in holiday season. Things are still happening up in Concord, or they're reported on, and there's a lot of things that kind of go on even when nobody's there, let's say, a lot of discussions. A couple of issues that have come up that I think are very important that people at home would be concerned about if they knew about them. We want to make sure that they know about them. One is this federal funding for education for the state of New Hampshire. We've got public schools.
Right.
There's two broad categories of schools, public and private.
Public and private, right. Charter schools.
Charter schools. Within the realm of public schools, we have the mainstream, what I call factory schools, one-size-fits-all kind of approach, like we have here in Nashua, the Nashua School District. And we have the charter schools, both public, but two separate tracks.
Right.
And as we know, you've been around government for a while. I didn't really know about it until I got involved as an alderman. I began to see what's really going on in education. And we understand how much money is being spent and what the results are. And many times the results don't match up with the amount of money that's being spent. We certainly see that. And occasionally, there are some bright spots in the story, though. And one of the bright spots here in New Hampshire is charter school performance.
That's right.
And the charter school performance has been noticed by the federal government, and they make funds available for states that are doing particularly well.
Right. They make funds for replication and expansion of charter schools.
So it's not a remedial fund. Oh, you guys aren't doing so good. Let's add some more money.
No,
it's
not
you've
at
done
all.
well.
It's you've done well. That's
Let's capitalize on this and do something more. Try to expand the sphere and maybe expand some of the influence so that other schools can benefit from what you, in this case, the charter schools, have learned. Right. So the federal government saw good results in New Hampshire. And what did they do as a result of that?
Throughout the country. I mean,
and throughout the country.
For charter schools throughout the country.
But
the grant to New Hampshire was $46 million over a 5-year period.
That's a lot of money,
That's
especially
a lot of
for
money.
a small state.
Yes.
And for us to have earned that, I think that's remarkable.
It is.
And of course, right here in Nashua, we have two very good charter schools. You're involved in the Micro Society Academy.
Right.
You're on the board there.
I'm on the board at Micro Society, yes.
Which is an elementary school.
Yes.
And then we also have the Academy for Science and Design, a middle school and high school primarily that's over on
which is number one.
Number one, right.
And has been number one for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I guess.
Number one in the state.
Yeah.
Not just among charter schools, but number one
Number
public
one
schools.
public school, that's right.
Which of course gives a very high ranking in the entire country, as is Micro Society Academy, very highly ranked in the entire country. So the federal government saw these successes, and particularly here in Nashua, and they channeled $46 million towards New Hampshire for the further development of public education.
That's right.
Hopefully that some of the ideas that are developed in charter schools have more charter schools, with the idea that some of these ideas can kind of spill over into the regular public schools, where in contrast we spend way more money and get much lower results. Just so folks at home understand, the Nashua Public Schools as a district are ranked in the bottom third in the state.
That's right.
So we've got the charter high school.
I think the highest ranking public school in New Hampshire is 84th or something.
In
like
Nashua?
that. It's one of the schools in Nashua, yes.
Okay, the highest ranking Nashua school is 84th in the state?
Something like 84th, yeah.
Okay. Whereas, of course, the highest ranking charter school is
Number one.
number one and among the best in the country.
And you know, it's not to boast about the charter school being the better education.
Right.
It's about educating the kids.
Right.
About educating our children. It doesn't matter what school they go to if they're getting the proper education.
Exactly.
And obviously, they're getting a better education in the charter schools than they are in your regular public schools.
Right.
For whatever reason, whether it's the quality of the teachers, whether it's financially, whatever it is, results are results. And if a school is ranked number one, they're educating the children. They're giving them proper education
Right.
so that they can go forward in life.
Right. And that's what's important. And one of the limitations in charter school is that there's only so many seats
Right.
allowed.
Right.
And right now, there's a waiting list to get into Academy for
That's
Science
right.
and Design.
And they do not discriminate in any way.
Nope.
It's done simply by a lottery, first come, first serve. There is
So-
no discrimination, and that's a myth that has gone around for so many years.
Yes.
It's just an excuse for the unions to discriminate or hate the charter schools.
And we
that's
don't
all
want
it's
that.
about. It's envy, it's greed, it's jealousy. That's all it is.
Yeah, they don't like
They
to
cannot
see the...
compete with the charter schools.
Right.
So
They don't want to compete with anybody.
Right. So what the legislature did was to vote down taking the $46 million federal money with no strings attached. But since the Democrats are in the majority, they voted it down. They decided not to take the money.
Right, so here's $46 million federal grant to improve education,
Right.
to expand the number of charter schools so that some of the folks, kids that are on the waiting list, remember, kids that are on a waiting list to get into a charter school are on a waiting list to get out of the regular public school.
That's correct.
That's where they're at.
That's correct.
So trying to get more of these kids into the seats they want to be in so they can have a better life,
Right.
and we can create, put Nashua on the map nationally, even more so than it already is, for quality, high quality public education. It all sounds good until the state legislature says, no thanks, we don't want your free money, we don't want the $46 million because we don't want to improve education. What's the deal?
You know, I wish I knew what the deal was. What it amounts to is we have no representation here in Nashua. Our representation is strictly party line. The party, the unions, are against charter schools. All the Democrats vote according to the party lines.
Yeah, there's a real issue with this. We were talking about it. I think I was talking with Doris Hohensee when she was on the show recently, or maybe
School
it
board
was
member, yeah.
school board member,
Right.
And with Paula Johnson. Paula Johnson, by the
And
way,
Paula,
is the
newly elected.
newly elected school board member,
Right.
the only one on that new board who has not taken money from the teachers union. So how are we to expect really unbiased, fair government that's good for the folks at home sitting around a kitchen table who want their kids to get a good education?
But what kind of people deliberately deny children a better education? What kind of person is that?
Well, I hate to speculate.
That's a sick puppy.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier that you think it's based on envy and hate, and I have to agree with you.
It is. I mean, you know, this is not anything new. When I was in the legislature, it was the same thing. I mean, we can go back to 2010, 11, 12, 13. It was the same thing. They hated charter schools back then.
Right.
There's a different reason for their hate every time something comes up
Yeah.
promoting charter schools.
Sure.
They come up with a different reason not to promote it.
Yeah, one of the reasons, of course, you cited earlier was that they discriminate.
Right.
And that's not true. That's a myth. They don't. Another reason is that they don't take special ed. That, too, is a myth.
That's a
you
myth.
know from your involvement on
Absolutely.
Microsociety Academy that if a kid comes in, he's got an IEP or anything like that, you accommodate those.
They go by the lottery. The next one in line is the one that comes if they've got disabilities of any kind. They cannot discriminate and say, oh, we'll skip that one and go to the next one.
Right.
That child comes in.
Right. So these myths to try to target charter schools as not being best for the folks at home is completely false.
That's absolutely right.
And these schools provide an opportunity for kids to get out from where they're at, to have a better future, really. And here the legislature has rejected this $46 million. Again, this is for public schools. For
Yes.
public schools.
Yeah.
But we should point out that the charter schools are generally speaking non-union. They have a much leaner.
They're educating kids for less than 50% of the money
I know. That's
that
very
goes to
significant.
the education of a regular public school student.
Right.
It's like $15,000. The charter schools are doing it the same thing, a better education, for less than $7,000.
Right. And that's per pupil per year.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. So not only are the students
Originally, their
served,
complaint was that when a child left the regular public school and went to the charter school, that they were afraid the money would go with them, and they public school would lose that money. That's not true.
well, we know that most of the public school money that winds up in Nashua comes from local taxes, not from the state.
That's right.
So there is state money that goes to those students in the charter school.
Yes.
And it's like $7,000 per year.
Yeah.
The charter schools, by the way, don't get any money locally. None of
That's right.
there's no money locally. It's only state money. But the local public school, even as Nashua's enrollment has gone down, as performance stays very low, there's
But the
always
costs are
more
going
and
up.
more money. More and more money poured into this.
They're
That's-
educating less kids, but costing more.
Right. So I think
That's-
it's good money after bad.
That's not even economics 101.
No, and I think the folks at home sitting around the table should ask themselves, why are we continuing to have high property taxes that goes to education, where here is federal money, and granted it's federal taxes that ultimately make that up.
Yeah,
It's
of
still
course,
tax
of
dollars.
course. There is
but
no
it's-
free money.
No, there's no free money, but it's $46 million infusion into the state of New Hampshire that would benefit people right here in Nashua. That
And
the
that's
folks,
over a period of 5 years. That's
over a period
not
of 5
all
years.
at once.
Okay. But over a period of 5
Yeah.
years, it's a
So it's
significant amount
basically
of money.
$9 million a year.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And so what can folks at home do about this? What should they do? Should they contact the representatives?
Have to contact the representatives, and I'll be honest with you, the only way I can say it is it probably won't do any good because these people vote in lockstep.
Yeah, they do.
What the unions and the party tells them to vote on is what they vote on.
So what people at
It's
home,
almost like they don't have a mind of their own.
well,
And I hate saying things like that,
but
but it's the
that's
facts
the picture
bear,
that's out there.
That's right. The facts bear it out.
Yeah, the facts bear it out. So, we often hear the phrase, well, elections have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people at home need to understand that local elections have consequences.
Yep.
And that if people at home are not happy with the fact that we're turning down federal aid for education
Mm-hmm.
in the state of New Hampshire, that they should think about who they're going to elect to these offices come next year for the state. Certainly locally, too.
My fear is if you were to go out onto the street like you see on television sometime, these roving reporters.
Right.
My fear is if you went out on the streets of Nashua and tried to talk to people about this, most of them wouldn't know anything about it
Well, that's why we're doing the show. One of the reasons
because they're
we're doing the
not
show.
getting involved in what their government is doing.
I've noticed, right, they're not. They're not. I no longer subscribe to the Telegraph. I don't want to
I
bash the
don't either.
Telegraph. I do still subscribe to Union Leader, but
That belongs on the checkout counter in the supermarket.
it does. Occasionally, though, for whatever reason, maybe the Telegraph is trying to sell more subscriptions, we do get the Telegraph again. And I can look at the Telegraph and Union Leader in the same day, and I see very different coverage of really one event. I mean, this is one state or one city, and I see what Telegraph says is going on in Nashua or what's going on in the state, what Union Leader says, and they're really two different things. So if someone were to only read one or the other, in particular, if you're only to read the Telegraph, I think you're missing out on a larger picture of what's going on in the state. And
That's
I'm not
right.
sure how thoroughly this $46 million rejection was covered in the Telegraph. Maybe it was, but I don't know.
It was barely covered anywhere, even on the television, on the news channels and whatnot. It was like a 5-6 second announcement that they had rejected it.
Yeah, well, I think it's reprehensible
Yeah.
that we do that.
It is.
I'm not all for taking free money because there is no such thing as free money, as you pointed out. There's no such thing as free money. But here we have an opportunity really to enhance education for the children in the state. I've got a 3-year-old at home.
This is the most important thing that we can do for
I agree.
our citizens.
I agree.
Educate the kids.
And certainly here in Nashua, for our local budget, it's half of our local expenditure every year. Half.
Yeah.
And when you see the money that goes into it and you see the poor quality of the results, and you see the kinds of things that are being pushed in the school system, here's this money coming in to provide a good alternative, and it's rejected, I think is bad. Folks at home should know about it.
I'm not an expert on why the public schools are not performing as well as we
Right.
think they should, or not performing on an equal basis. But, what can it be? It can be administration. It can be unions representing maintenance people. It can be the teachers' unions. It could be a combination of all. nevertheless, the facts are there.
Mm-hmm.
They're not performing up to par.
Well, I think it's good to take a look at and try to understand what the cause would be. And I will tell you from my time as an alderman, and from my time on the show, I have another show here too called Perspectives that I host, and I've had some charter school folks come in. When I've spoken with people from the charter school, their focus 100% is on education.
Yes.
If there's any talk about funding, it's a recognition that they have to do a lot with a little because they get a lot less.
Yes.
And they would like a little more. They could use a little more. They would leverage that very wisely if they had a little more. But their focus is on education. In contrast, when I've heard people who from the public schools, regular public schools, speaking at the microphone in budget meetings or hearings or whatnot, or contract negotiation times, it's not about education.
No.
It's always about money.
It's always about money.
Only about money.
Yeah.
And
Money
I think-
grabbers.
I think that there's two different tracks. I'm not saying every single teacher is that way. I don't think that every teacher is represented by the union president, for instance. I know for a fact that that's not the case. But
I know that also.
when I hear from the people that come out and speak on behalf of this teacher body, they're talking only about money, and the focus is not on education. And I think that's the prime difference. The charter schools are focused on education. They're focused, really, truly focused on children. And I think the regular public schools pay lip service to a focus on children and to focus on education. The real focus is on money. So folks at home need to understand that. And I think that they do.
I think there's too much extracurricular activities also.
Well, that's expensive stuff.
There's a lot of expense in football programs, baseball programs, basketball, all sorts of programs that some of that money goes into.
Yeah.
It's got to be more proportional to the importance of the program.
Right.
Education has got to be the main
Reading, writing, and math.
part of their budget.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Reading, writing, and math. Absolutely.
Now let's talk a little bit about how or why folks at home maybe don't know. There's another piece of legislation that's making its way through Concord, sponsored by one of our own Nashua delegation, that has to do with right to know. A lot of times citizens will only know what's going on behind in the hallowed halls of government if they file a right to know request. And it's surprising, people are surprised by what they can find out.
And that's something that we should all be able to do.
Something we should all be able to do, because we do have a right to know how our money's being spent.
That's right.
I will note that the phrase that we use, while it's not enshrined in the Constitution, the phrase is right to know.
Right.
It's not privilege to know. It's not pay to know. It's right to know. And so the folks at home who are paying this money have a right to know how it's being spent.
Sure.
And from time to time, a citizen asks a question in public maybe, or in an email or something, and invariably, I would say, well, more often than not, let's say that, more often than not, particularly depending on what the issue might pertain to, they're met with stonewalling,
Right.
a delay, or, well, we don't want to talk about that, or that's a matter that we're not going to discuss here. We do that in closed session, or whatever. Any kind of excuse that there might be. So, since that person doesn't get an answer, they file a right to know request, and then more pushback. But ultimately, some information does begin to come out, and the information that comes out is eye-opening. It usually paints a picture of a much worse situation than the person ever visualized or imagined when they first asked the innocent question.
Yeah, because they're only getting the surface of it
Right.
before they file the right to know, and they're getting the details from that.
Right, and that particularly happened here in Nashua with regard to the assessing department.
Right.
We know that Lori Ortolano, Mrs. Ortolano, who I've had on the show before, has done an excellent job, I think,
has.
on behalf
She
of
has. She's to be
taxpayers here.
commended.
She's dug in to find things. She had a question about her own, a simple question about her own assessment on her own house.
Originally, it was based only on her own.
Right, that's it. She just wanted to know. Pick up the phone. Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
She's met with resistance. She says, well, when I met with resistance, that's a bit of an answer right there.
Yeah.
What's being covered up here?
Right.
So she starts filing right to knows, which of course is her right. And it's amazing what she's been found out, what she has found out, and it's resulted in police investigations, all kinds of personnel stuff,
Right.
filings with the state. Essentially, there are some major, major problems with the assessing department here in the city, and with how people's homes are assessed. And people have felt the brunt of
And
that.
basically, it hasn't been rectified.
Has not been
They've
rectified.
reorganized a little bit, but it's really just a mask over the real problem.
It really is. Now, I understand that the mayor has allocated some funds to hire a professional chief assessor, which I
Yeah.
think the city certainly needs. But one of the things that enabled us, one of the tools that enabled Lori and the rest of us to find out so much about what was going on was this right to know.
Right.
And as a result of this and some of the complaints that the city administration, mayor's administration has been voicing, you see that in the paper, one of our local legislators has filed some new legislation, proposed some new legislation in Concord that will
Representative
require
Ward 1.
Yep, Representative Ward 1, that will require that someone who wants to file this right to know request must pay for it. And not just pay for the piece of paper, but pay
No,
the
now
hourly.
you pay for the paper. They can charge you for the copies.
They already charge you for the copy. Now they want to
but that's
charge
it.
you for the man hours.
Yeah.
And my guess is that in a system like the city, which again there's no competition, how
It's a
long do you
means
think it's
of
going to take?
discouraging.
It's a means to discourage, and I think it's going to take a long time for someone to process what might be a simple request. So this, I think, is very dangerous for the people at home.
It is.
And I'm hoping that even some of the majority, the Democrat majority, of course, Representative Schmidt is a Democrat
Right.
in Ward 1. She's the one who's sponsoring this. I'm hoping that others will see how contrary this is to good democratic government, where we are government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's theoretically what we are. That's what Abraham Lincoln said, and that's what we are to be.
But we represent no taxes and as few fees as possible.
Right,
This
exactly.
is another fee.
Right.
It's not a tax, but it's a fee.
It's a fee, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you say it's meant to discourage.
Yes.
It's like they want the answer. They want to give the no answer to the person who asked the question. Say, well, you can if you want to, but it's going to cost you.
Right.
And it's not about open government. It's certainly not about transparency.
And once you implement a cost, it only goes up from there.
it only goes up.
It never goes down, never goes away.
I've not heard the mayor comment on this. I do know from what I've seen in the paper that he, along with Ms. Kleiner, complain about how much time these right to know requests require. Well, again, this is time required to look into a problem that's been festering for a very long time. So I think it's good for the folks to know, and I don't care that it takes them a lot of time. I don't think it takes them as much time. I think it's an exaggeration, frankly.
But like you said, they can drag it out
They can drag
since
it
they're
out.
being paid for it.
Right.
You have to pay for it. They can drag it out as long as they want.
And I think they're dragging it out to make the point, and then they want to drag it out later if this law goes into effect.
Right.
But the mayor has spoken many times, certainly when he was running the first time, about the importance of transparency in government. And I would hope that he would reconsider his position and say that in the interest of transparency, I, the mayor, do not support this legislation. Granted, he's not in Concord, but he can lobby in Concord.
Of course he
And he
can.
can certainly lobby with
He's in Concord all the time. He goes up to testify.
All right. Well, I think that it'd be wise for him. It'd be good for the city, and it would be certainly in the fair interest of transparency, which is what he's claimed to be all about, to make sure that this law doesn't pass.
But you have to wonder what precipitated her to submit this.
Good question.
She's an alderman also,
Yes.
alderwoman.
Yes.
So, did the mayor have an input there?
Right.
That's
Right.
what we don't know.
Right. We don't know that, but we do know from the articles that I've read that the administration has complained about the workload. I think what they really mean to complain about is they got caught.
Part of the reason for the workload is because, and you mentioned Ms. Kleiner, very nice lady.
Of course.
But
Yep.
she was thrust into something that she knows nothing whatsoever about.
Right.
It
That's not
takes-
fair.
No, it's
That's
not
not
fair.
fair. Not fair to
Absolutely
her.
not
No.
fair. But it takes longer for someone who is not familiar with what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn on the job. It takes longer for them to do the job, and
Well-
it impedes actually learning the job.
Right. That's true. And I think that if the mayor has put in the budget a request for a professional assessor, chief assessor. I imagine that was certainly with cooperation, probably with the lobbying by Ms. Kleiner. I'm guessing, I'm surmising here. So
Yeah.
I think that's good. I'm glad that if she's pushed for that, that she has. And I'm glad that the mayor has listened to that, if that's what happened, because that's what we need. The assessing department is critical to how a city's run. I mean,
But as
it's
far
the
as I know-
entire income
Yeah.
section of
As
city
far
government.
as I know, the crux of the problem still lies within the assessing department. There was nothing done to eliminate that.
Yeah.
So that individual that caused the entire problem is still there. I
Right.
haven't heard any differently.
No, I haven't either. No, I haven't either. I think that's probably the case. Clearly, there are issues there, and we only know about. We're only having this conversation because of Mrs. Ortolano pursuing her right
Yeah.
to know request.
Right.
And according to
Gotta
the
get back to the
legislation,
subject.
we do. But according to the legislation that is being proposed here, Mrs. Ortolano might have been discouraged from pursuing this, and then we wouldn't know at all.
Right.
And I think that something that is wrong, that's going on, mismanagement that's happening, and disparities, discrepancies between similar homes and different assessment levels would be continuing. And it only came to light because of the reassessment, citywide reassessment we had, that resulted in a lot of people's taxes going up, and what appeared to be arbitrary, and in fact turned out to be kind of arbitrary.
And what's going
in
to
many
come out of
cases.
this is there's going to have to be a reassessment eventually,
Right,
which costs money.
right.
So there's money wasted, and then more money that has to be poured into the situation
Right.
because it wasn't done right to start with.
Right. So two important things. We want to follow what's going on with the public education funding from the federal government. We want to follow
Now
what's happening.
that's been tabled. I don't know if we
Okay.
mentioned that or not.
It's been tabled, so it's
was
stopped for
tabled.
the time
So
being.
for the time being, it's stopped. It has to be brought off the table in order to have discussion,
Okay.
and then ultimately a new vote on it.
And then the second thing is, of course, this right to know legislation. We're going to watch that closely. That's
Right.
just proposed at this point. It hasn't been assigned a committee or anything like that.
Yeah.
Two important things that affect folks at home that they should know about.
Absolutely.
Don, we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in today. It's always a
Thank you,
pleasure,
David.
and time goes very, very
The time-
quickly.
Time went very, very
It
quickly.
does. So thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
I want to thank you
Thank
folks
you.
at home, too, for tuning in. I'm here with Don LeBrun, former state representative. I'm a former alderman, and Don was a former alderman, too. We're bringing to you some common sense perspective on what's going on in Concord that affects you and your tax dollars. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.